Well, good day, everybody. We're doing the Bible in a year, 2021. We're on day 124, and we're looking at First Chronicles 13 to 16. First Chronicles 13 to 16. Just give me a second here. So in First Chronicles 13, we have the great event. One of the first things that David did when he became king was to bring the chest of the covenant into his city, because David wanted the presence of the Lord to be very close to him. This was center. This was absolutely center to who David was, the presence of the Lord. And so we pick it up here in verse 3, and we read, "Let's ask them to join us so that we may bring the chest of our God back to us, because we didn't look for it in Saul's days." So they talk to everybody, they gather everybody, he consults with people, everybody but Yahweh. Yeah, this is really weird because David consults Yahweh on everything. So he just made an assumption here that this would be a good thing. So it was the right desire, but it ends up being the wrong execution on this. So um, in not consulting Yahweh, what we read now in verse 7, they moved God's chest on a new cart from Abinadab's house. Uzzah and Ahio were guiding the cart, while David and all Israel celebrated in God's presence with all their strength, accompanied by songs, zithers, harps, tambourines, cymbals, and trumpets. So it's a very passionate moment. It's a huge celebration, lots of noise, lots of singing. It's a huge festival. But the problem is that passion does not trump rightness. I don't know why we often don't get this right. We figure that if our intention was right, it's pleasing to the Lord. And though our intention shows that we weren't malicious, there is still a right and there still is a wrong. It's very clear in the kingdom. There is a right and there is a wrong, as defined by Yahweh, the Creator, the one who gets to define everything. So our passion doesn't trump rightness. So all of Israel is being passionate right now, but they are not in a right position. In verse 9 to 12 here, when they came to the Shidon's threshing floor, Uzzah reached out to the chest and grabbed it because the oxen had stumbled. But the Lord became angry with Uzzah and struck him because he had placed his hand on the chest. He died right there before God. Now, we have to remember back to the time when Yahweh was setting up the responsibility of the Levites. This was when the whole tabernacle, tent of meeting, was being put in place, and all the holy things have been made, and basically the worship was being designed. And the Kohathites were set aside as those who would handle the holy things. The holiest of holy things they were responsible for carrying. They didn't get carts. They weren't allowed to carry any of these things in carts at all. They had to carry them on their shoulders. Everything that was considered holy. And Aaron was warned that they needed to wrap these things up right. They were told how to wrap it. They had to wrap it right. They had to protect the Kohathites. That's what Yahweh was saying to them. You have you have to. It's basically you've got to make sure that the Kohathites don't get wiped out. Now, this is probably the most dangerous position there is, besides the high priest going in the Holy of Holies, that there is. And if for some reason it wasn't wrapped right and they happened to touch that holy item, they would die. And what do we have here? We have the holiest of the holy. The chest isn't being carried like it's supposed to be carried. It's on a cart. It was never supposed to be carried on a cart. It's supposed to be carried by the Levites. It's supposed to be carried by poles on their shoulders. And here, Uzzah, like he might have had the best of intention, but no is no. Nobody's allowed to touch the ark. Nobody. And Yahweh knows how to look after the things that belong to him. He wasn't about to allow that ark to fall, and Uzzah just showed that he was bringing Yahweh down to our level. And this is a holy item, and Noah's no, and he ends up dying. And it really falls on the shoulders of David because David did not inquire. He didn't ask how to bring this up. So it's an emotional day for David. As we see in verse 11 to 12, David was angry that the Lord lashed out at Uzzah, but David was angry because he didn't understand that he was the one who's at fault, because he didn't bother to consult. So we can get angry about things that we have no right to get angry about because we done it to ourselves. And so that it continues. And so that place is still called Perez Uzzah today. David was frightened by God that day. So there was anger, and he was also frightened by God that day. That's good. There's some things where there needs to be some fear. We need to be in awe of the things that are considered holy, the things that where God says is right, and where He says wrong is wrong, and we should there should be a fear there of the things that He has put in place, so that we will actually follow His instructions. There's a reason why He gave those instructions, because these things result. He did not punish Uzzah. Okay, understand that? This was a result. There was something about God's glory in these things, and flesh cannot encounter that glory, and that's what happened. This was a natural thing that happened. That when Uzzah touched the ark, his flesh encountered the glory of God, and he died as a result. So the instructions that we've been given isn't because Yahweh is mean. We've talked about this. It's because He's protecting us. He gives us these instructions to protect us from the things that want to kill us. That's something to consider. And then we have this wonderful thing about Obed Edom in verses 13 and 14. So David didn't take the chest away with him to David's city. Instead, he had it put in the house of Obed Edom. Like David just cut and run. That's it. The Gittite. God's chest stayed with Obed Edom, household for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed Edom's household and all that he had. Now, we can see as we read on the place of Obed Edom in surrounding the ark. Okay, so we understand that he is a Levite. We also see that he is a gatekeeper. He is a descendant of gatekeepers. He is a gatekeeper, and he becomes one of the important gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers were basically the security guards, if you want to put it that way. They were the ones, the crowd control. They were the ones that prevented people from doing things that they weren't supposed to do. And when Solomon built the temple, they were the ones who were responsible for the treasury rooms and all that sort of stuff, and just keeping an eye on things. But according to tradition, the Jewish tradition, um, all the females in his family gave birth to 6 children in the 3 months of having the chest. Now, uh, if you want to consider, in some of the traditions, it's they birth 2 children each month for 3 months, or they birth 6 children all at once, but in 3 months. So this is the blessing that they're referring to, and this isn't in the Bible. This is what's been handed down um, by the rabbis. This has been handed down throughout the centuries. This is the tradition of how he was blessed. I thought you'd be interested in that, so I threw that in there. Okay, so in chapter 14, verses 16 to 17, I just want to make sure I didn't skip something here. Let me go back for a second. Okay, I didn't. So chapter 14, verses 16 to 17. We have this. Look how important this is to David. David followed God's orders exactly. Okay, that is from another one. Oh no, this is okay. So David followed God's orders exactly, and they defeated the Philistine army from Gibeon all the way to Gezer. David's same fame spread throughout all lands, and the Lord made all the nations fear him. Okay, so we've already read this in Second Samuel, but this is so important. This is so key, and this is why this whole bringing up the ark was kind of weird, because David consulted the Lord on everything, and he followed the instructions as they were given, and that's how he knew what to do the second time. Was because he did the research, and he found out that it was the Levites who had to carry it up, and that's what ended up happening there. And so we see here, just as we progress. Okay, so he brought up the ark, and the Philistines are attacking, which we read in Second Samuel, and we see that he had victory. Because of this obedience, and he was blessed, and the nations feared him because of this relationship that he had with Yahweh. So this is really a significant part of us understanding David and the relationship between him and Yahweh. It's David is nothing without Yahweh. David knew he would be nothing without Yahweh. It's how he walks so humbly before him. It's I guess it's the difference between David and Solomon, is that Solomon never developed that relationship with Yahweh, and this quite often happens between parents and children. The idea is that children will go on into even greater things with Yahweh than the parents, but quite often the parents have had some kind of experience that the children didn't, that the parents have been brought into this intimate relationship that doesn't translate without experience. So that's why children need to seek their own experience. They need to press in themselves to have that encounter with the Lord. They can't live on the encounter of their parents. So anyways, that's just a side note there. In chapter 15, we see here that David seemed to Google this whole thing about the chest. He looked up the information, and it says here in verse 2, David said, only the Levites may carry God's chest, because the Lord has chosen them to carry the Lord's chest and to minister to him forever. So this is David doing it right now. This is him going back to take two, and making sure that they do it right. And look at this, and this is kind of refreshing in leadership. In verses 12 to 13, and again in 15, look, it says, he said to them, you are the household heads of the Levites. Make yourselves holy, you and your brothers, and then bring the chest of the Lord, Israel's God, to the place I've prepared for it. When you were with us the first time, the Lord our God burst out against us because we didn't ask his advice properly. Bang, there you go. There's David being David. This is on me, guys. I didn't do this. I didn't ask advice. I didn't seek instructions on this. And the death of Uzzah is on my head because you guys weren't with me and we didn't do this right. So the Levites carried God's chest with poles on the shoulders, and just as Moses had commanded, according to the Lord's word. So it was all recorded there. But you have to understand that things weren't set up as we see them set up with David going forward and with Solomon. They were just doing what they thought were best, and there was not a great deal of instruction going on. But it's going to be set up. That's what's happening now. It's getting established. It wasn't something that Saul was overly concerned with, because Saul didn't pursue the relationship that he should have pursued. But David was already in that relationship before he was anointed as king. And that's the difference. And then in verse 16, we see something that's very, very significant here. Then David told the leaders of the Levites to appoint some of their relatives as singers, to raise their voices joyfully, accompanied by musical instruments, including harps, lyres, and cymbals. Now music is about to become a very important part of the Israeli worship. And David is establishing it right here as they're bringing up the ark. It's something to take note of. And he's going to solidify it as we go forward. So then in verse 29, as the chest containing the Lord's covenant entered David's city, Michal Saul's daughter, looked out the window. When she saw King David leaping and dancing, she lost all respect for him. Now, this is passion in the context of rightness. Before we had passion without rightness, and somebody died. Now we have passion in the context of rightness, and nothing else matters. Going forward, we'll find out that David is not put off by this. That he man he he'd he will be more even more undignified than this is what he said to her, in his worship, in his enthusiastic expression of love for Yahweh. Nothing, and no one would get in his way. But there's a difference between passion in the context of rightness and the passion in the context of wrongness. So, and in chapter 16, verses 2 to 3, David had finished offering the entirely burned offerings and the well being sacrifices. Look how personal this becomes. He blessed the people in the Lord's name and distributed a loaf of bread and a piece of meat and a raisin cake to every Israelite man and woman. What? Every Israelite man and woman. He gave a loaf of bread, a piece of meat, and a raisin cake. Wow, what kind of administration did he have in place that he could pull off that? But that's how personal he personally wanted to celebrate with each Israelite this fantastic thing that was taking place. Verses 4 and 7. You know, David broke the instructions for bringing up the chest, and somebody died. But here we have an example of breaking the instructions and nobody dying. So David appointed some of the Levites to serve before the Lord's chest, right there, underline that, before the Lord's chest. The only one who is allowed to come in to the presence of the chest is the high priest. And here he appoints a choir to serve before the Lord's chest in order to remember, to give thanks, and to praise the Lord, Israel's God. And in verse 7, on the same day, for the first time, David ordered Asaph and his relatives to give thanks to the Lord. That's just an amazing thing that this was tolerated because it was pleasing to the Lord. He loved this, and so he was willing to overlook what he had put in place. And the worship that had been in place before was the worship of offerings, and that wasn't taking place, not properly, not in the way it should have been. And so David was putting everything in order. You know, the most righteous were finding their way to come to Hebron and to make sacrifices, but it was not a global Israeli thing that was taking place. But David is now establishing it in a way that it can go forward. So in verse 37, then David placed Asaph and his relatives together with Obed Edom, recognize the name, and 68 of his relatives to minister there continually before the chest containing the Lord's covenant, following the routines required on each day. So they took out the instructions. They're now following those instructions. Obed Edom is one of the security, the gatekeepers that will be involved in all of this, and the sacrifices. And along with the sacrifices came the singing as well. So that's all being established now, because David is bringing that in, and for him, the priority of the establishing of the worship and having the presence where he was. Yeah, and even that the Lord didn't instruct him on that, but yeah, it's another thing maybe that the Lord tolerated. So there you go. You've got it there. You be blessed in this day, and just consider that relationship that David demonstrated with the Lord, that faithfulness, that obedience, how he got in trouble when he didn't check with the Lord, and how everything was flowing with blessings when he did check with the Lord. You guys be blessed. Thanks for being with me.